Welcome to the channel. Today, we embark on a journey that explores the deepest corners of the human heart, where the most beautiful connections are found in the most unlikely of places. Stay with me, because this is a story about the light that refuses to go out, even behind the highest walls. Imagine being lost in a world of gray and steel, only to find the one person who truly sees you. This is the long road home. The iron gates of Blackwood Prison didn't just close, they screamed. It was a heavy, final sound that seemed to vibrate through the soles of Alex Miller's shoes, traveling up his spine like an electric shock. To a 24-year-old who had spent his life surrounded by the soft scent of old library books and the gentle hum of university halls, this place was a waking nightmare. The air here was different. It was thick with the smell of floor wax, stale coffee, and the underlying scent of unwashed despair. Alex adjusted his orange jumpsuit, feeling the fabric scratch against his skin. It was too large for him, the sleeves hanging past his wrists, making him look even smaller and more out of place than he already felt. His hands, thin and trembling, were the hands of a pianist or a dreamer, not someone meant to survive in a cage of concrete and wire. He had made a mistake, a desperate choice born from love for a family that was drowning in debt, and now the world was closing in on him. As the guards led him through the main yard toward the processing center, Alex kept his head down, trying to become invisible. He could feel the eyes on him. He was the new kid, the fish out of water, a splash of vulnerability in a sea of hardened faces. The yard was a chaotic symphony of shouts, the rhythmic bouncing of a basketball, and the clinking of chains. But then, amidst the noise, everything seemed to fall silent. It started with a feeling, a sudden warmth on the side of his face that made him lift his gaze, despite every instinct telling him not to. That was when he saw him. Standing near the rusted weight benches was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the very mountain range that loomed over the prison walls. He was a presence that commanded the space around him without saying a single word. His hair was short, dark, and dusted with the faintest hint of gray at the temples, though he couldn't have been much older than 30. But it was his eyes that stopped Alex's breath. They were the color of steel in a storm, a sharp, piercing blue that seemed to cut through the noise of the yard. Alex expected to see judgment or a threat in those eyes, the way he had seen it in everyone else's since he arrived. Instead, he saw something that felt like a quiet recognition. It was a look that didn't demand anything, a look that simply acknowledged Alex's existence in a way that made him feel human for the first time in days. The man didn't move, didn't smile, and didn't look away. He stood there, a silent monolith of strength, and for a fleeting second, the terrifying weight in Alex's chest felt just a little bit lighter. The guard shoved Alex's shoulder, forcing him to move forward. "Keep moving, Miller. Don't get any ideas," the guard growled. Alex stumbled, his face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and a strange, lingering heat from that brief connection. He didn't look back, but he could feel that steel-blue gaze following him until the heavy doors of the cell block swung shut. The processing was a blur of cold questions and impersonal commands. By the time the sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows through the barred windows, Alex was being marched down a narrow corridor. The sound of his own footsteps echoed, hollow and lonely. They stopped in front of cell 402. The guard turned the key, and the heavy door slid open with a mechanical groan. "This is your home for now," the guard said, pushing him inside. "Try to stay out of trouble." The cell was tiny, barely 6 feet by 8. It felt like a tomb made of cinder blocks. But as the door clicked shut behind him, Alex realized he wasn't alone. Sitting on the lower bunk was the man from the yard. Up close, his physical presence was even more overwhelming. He sat with his back against the wall, one leg bent, his arms resting casually on his knees. He looked like he belonged there, not because he was a criminal, but because he was a force of nature that no walls could truly contain. His shoulders were broad, filling the cramped space, and the air in the cell seemed to hum with the low-frequency vibration of his breathing. Alex froze, his back pressed against the cold metal of the door. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He didn't know what to do. where to look. He felt so fragile in the face of such quiet power. The man looked up. The steel blue eyes were softer now, less like a storm and more like the calm surface of a lake at dusk. He didn't speak for a long time, just watched Alex with a steady, grounding intensity. "You look like you're about to faint, kid," the man said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that Alex felt more than heard. It was a sound that seemed to settle in the center of his chest, steadying his frantic pulse. Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry. I've never been in a place like this before." "None of us have, until we are," the man replied. He stood up, and the movement was fluid, graceful for someone of his size. He moved to the corner of the cell, giving Alex more room. "I'm Gabe." "Alex," he whispered, finally letting go of the door handle. "Well, Alex," Gabe said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming even more soothing. "This is your bunk. I take the bottom, you take the top. That okay with you?" Alex nodded quickly, his eyes wide. He climbed the ladder to the top bunk, his movements hurried and clumsy. As he lay down on the thin, hard mattress, he felt the entire frame of the bunk bed shift under Gabe's weight as he sat back down below. It should have been terrifying being locked in a tiny room with a stranger who could easily crush him. But as Alex stared at the cracked ceiling, he realized he wasn't afraid. There was an aura around Gabe, a sense of profound, unshakable safety. It was as if Gabe had built an invisible fortress within these four walls. And for the first time since his arrest, Alex felt like he could breathe without the air catching in his throat. The night in Blackwood was never truly quiet. There were always distant shouts, the clanging of pipes, and the heavy footsteps of guards on patrol. But inside cell 402, a different kind of silence took hold. It was a silence charged with something Alex couldn't quite name. It was the tension of two souls suddenly pressed together, the awareness of every shift in weight and every intake of breath. Alex turned on his side, looking down over the edge of his bunk. In the dim light of the corridor that filtered through the bars, he could see Gabe. The man was sitting up, his head resting against the wall, staring out into the darkness. He looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, but doing so with a quiet, noble grace. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Alex asked, his voice barely a breath. Gabe didn't turn his head, but Alex saw his jaw tighten slightly. "Because this place tries to take everything from you, Alex. Your name, your pride, your hope. I've seen it happen to better men than me. I decided a long time ago they wouldn't take my humanity. And looking at you, you still have yours. I like to see you keep it." The honesty in his voice brought a sting to Alex's eyes. He'd spent weeks feeling like a number, a mistake, a piece of trash to be discarded. But here, in the dark, Gabe was treating him like he mattered. "I'm scared, Gabe," Alex confessed, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Gabe finally turned his head, his blue eyes catching the faint light. He reached out, his hand hovering near the edge of the bunk. For a second, Alex thought he might touch him, but Gabe kept his distance, respecting the space between them. "I know," Gabe said softly, "but you're not alone now. Get some sleep, kid. I'll be right here." As Alex closed his eyes, the sound of Gabe's steady breathing became a lullaby. It was a rhythmic, grounding presence that filled the small cell, pushing back the shadows of the prison. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alex Miller drifted into a sleep that wasn't haunted by nightmares. He didn't know what the morning would bring, or how he would survive the years ahead, but as he felt the subtle vibration of Gabe's presence below him, he knew one thing for certain. The storm was still raging outside, but inside this tiny cage, he had found a shelter he never expected to find. The journey was long, and the road was dark, but he was no longer walking it by himself. This was the beginning of something that went beyond the walls, beyond the bars, and into the very essence of what it meant to be found by another soul. The weeks that followed were a slow, rhythmic dance of survival and discovery. In Blackwood, time didn't flow like a river. It dripped like a leaking faucet in a cold room, steady, heavy, and impossible to ignore. But for Alex, the suffocating weight of the prison had begun to shift. The gray concrete walls hadn't changed, and the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights remained the same, Yet the world inside cell 402 had become a sanctuary. It was a fragile bubble of humanity, and at the center of it was Gabe. Gabe was a man of very few words, but his silence was never empty. It was a protective cloak he wrapped around Alex without ever having to say a thing. In the cafeteria, where the air was always thick with tension and the threat of a sudden outburst, Gabe simply sat across from Alex. He didn't need to glare or posture. His mere presence, the sheer gravity of his broad shoulders and the steady, unblinking focus of his steel-blue eyes, was enough to create a perimeter of peace. Alex would pick at his food, his heart usually racing at the sounds of clattering trays and raised voices. But every time he looked up and met Gabe's gaze, his pulse would find its rhythm again. It was as if Gabe was an anchor, and as long as Alex stayed close, he wouldn't be swept away by the dark currents of Blackwood. They developed a language of their own, one built on small gestures and shared glances. It was the way Gabe would leave an extra piece of fruit on Alex's tray, or the way Alex would quietly organize Gabe's few personal belongings while he was at his work detail in the machine shop. It was in the soft clinking of the ladder when Alex climbed up to his bunk, and the way Gabe would shift his weight below, a silent acknowledgement that he was there, that he was awake, that he was watching over him. The tension between them was growing, but it wasn't the kind of tension that felt dangerous. It was an atmosphere of pressure, a magnetic pull that made the few inches of air between them in the cramped cell feel electric. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon during the hour of outdoor recreation. The sky over the prison yard was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with the promise of a storm. Most of the men were huddled near the walls, seeking shelter from the wind that whipped through the chain-link fences. Alex was walking near the edge of the track, his thoughts lost in a book he had been reading, his fingers tracing the frayed edges of the pages. He felt a sudden, sharp chill in the air, and then the sky simply opened up. It wasn't a gentle rain. It was a torrential downpour, a wall of water that turned the dirt of the yard into a slick, treacherous slurry in a matter of seconds. The guards began shouting for everyone to head back inside, and a chaotic scramble ensued. Alex turned to run, but his worn-out shoes found no purchase on the darkening mud. His feet slipped out from under him, and for a terrifying second, he was weightless, falling toward the hard, unforgiving ground. He braced for the impact, closing his eyes, but it never came. Instead, two massive, powerful hands caught him by the shoulders. The strength behind them was staggering, halting his fall with an ease that took Alex's breath away. He was pulled upward and back, his spine pressing against a chest that felt as solid and warm as a sun-baked stone. The world seemed to slow down, the frantic shouts of the guards and the roar of the rain fading into a dull hum. Gabe didn't let go. His hands remained firmly on Alex's shoulders, the heat of his palms soaking through the thin, wet fabric of the jumpsuit. Alex could feel the vibration of Gabe's heart through his back, a steady, powerful beat that drowned out everything else. He turned his head slightly, and there was Gabe, his face only inches away. Water was streaming down Gabe's forehead, caught in his eyelashes and dripping from his jaw, but his eyes were fixed on Alex with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "I've got you," Gabe said. The words were low, barely audible over the storm, but they resonated deep in Alex's soul. They stood there for a moment that felt like an eternity, two figures carved out of the rain and the gray. The cold water was soaking them to the bone, but Alex had never felt warmer. He could feel the raw power in Gabe's arms, the protective instinct that radiated from him like a physical force. It wasn't just about the fall anymore. It was about the way Gabe looked at him, not as a victim, not as a number, but as someone precious, someone worth catching. The air between them was thick with a new kind of silence, a realization that the bond between them had shifted from companionship to something much deeper, something that neither of them knew how to name yet. The guards' whistles finally broke the spell. Gabe didn't release his grip until he was sure Alex's footing was secure, his hands lingering for a fraction of a second too long on Alex's arms before he stepped back. They walked back to the cell block in silence, their clothes heavy and dripping, their breaths coming in synchronized clouds in the chilly air. That night, The atmosphere in cell 402 was different. The rain continued to lash against the small, barred window, a rhythmic drumming that isolated them even further from the rest of the world. They had been given dry clothes, but the dampness seemed to have settled in their bones, making the small space feel even more intimate. Gabe was sitting on the lower bunk, drying his hair with a thin towel, his movements slow and deliberate. Alex sat on the edge of the ladder, his hands tucked between his knees, watching the way the shadows played across Gabe's features. "Why were you in the yard today, Alex?" Gabe asked, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "You usually stay by the wall when it looks like a storm." Alex shrugged, his gaze dropping to his own hands. "I was thinking about home, about how my mom used to tell me that rain was just the world starting over. I guess I wanted to believe that for a minute." Gabe stopped moving. He dropped the towel and looked at Alex, his expression unreadable. "What was home like for you?" And then the floodgates opened. In the quiet darkness of the cell, Alex began to talk. He spoke about the small town where everyone knew your business, about the piano lessons he couldn't afford but took anyway, and about the crushing weight of the medical bills that had pushed his family to the brink. He talked about the night he had tried to help, the desperate, poorly planned move that had landed him here. He spoke until his voice was a mere whisper, his vulnerabilities laid bare in a way he had never shared with anyone. When he finished, there was a long silence. Alex expected Gabe to offer a platitude, or perhaps say nothing at all. Instead, Gabe shifted on the bunk, clearing a space next to him. "Sit," Gabe commanded softly. Alex hesitated for a heartbeat before climbing down and sitting on the edge of the lower bunk. He was so close to Gabe that he could feel the heat radiating from his body. Gabe didn't look at him. He stared at the opposite wall, his hands clasped together. "I grew up in Montana," Gabe began, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the mattress. "My father was a man who believed that strength was the only thing that mattered. I spent my life working under the hoods of trucks, trying to be the man he wanted me to be. But I wasn't like him. I didn't want to hurt things. I wanted to fix them." He paused, his jaw tightening. "There was a boy in our town. He was like you, Alex. He had music in him. People didn't like that. One night, a group of men decided to teach him a lesson. I happened to be there. I didn't think. I just acted. I did what I had to do to make sure he could still walk home. But in a town like that, the law doesn't care about why you fight. They only care that you did." Gabe turned his head then, and for the first time, Alex saw a flash of pain in those steel blue eyes, a deep, ancient sorrow that made his heart ache. "I don't regret it," Gabe whispered. "But sometimes I wonder if I'm just another broken thing that can't be fixed." Without thinking, Alex reached out. His hand, so small compared to Gabe's, rested tentatively on Gabe's forearm. The skin was rough, scarred from years of manual labor, but it felt like the most beautiful thing Alex had ever touched. He felt Gabe's muscles jump under his touch, but the man didn't pull away. "You're not broken, Gabe," Alex said, his voice steady and full of a conviction he didn't know he possessed. "You're the only thing in this place that feels real. You're the only thing that feels like light." Gabe's gaze dropped to Alex's hand, and then slowly traveled up his arm, settling on his face. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. It was a physical weight, a thick, sweet pressure that made it hard to breathe. Gabe leaned in just an inch, his scent, a mix of soap and something uniquely him, filling Alex's senses. In that moment, the prison walls disappeared. There was no Blackwood, no sentences, no guards. There was only the two of them, two souls who had found each other in the dark, held together by the gravity of their shared scars. Gabe reached up, his large thumb brushing against Alex's cheekbone with a tenderness that was almost unbearable. It was a gesture of such profound affection and longing that Alex felt a tear prick at the corner of his eye. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The connection was deeper than physical touch. It was the absolute, unwavering understanding of another human being. It was the realization that they were no longer just surviving. They were living for each other. "We're going to get through this," Gabe promised, his voice a low, sacred vow. "Both of us." As the rain continued to fall outside, sealing them into their small, private world, Alex leaned his head against Gabe's shoulder. He felt the massive arm wrap around him, pulling him close, shielding him from the cold and the fear. In the heart of the fortress, amidst the steel and stone, a love had bloomed that was stronger than anything the world could throw at it. They were two broken pieces that had finally found where they fit, and for the first time in his life, Alex Miller knew exactly where he belonged. He was home. The piece they had built within the walls of Cell 402 was a beautiful, glass-like thing, stunning to behold, but incredibly fragile. It was a world made of soft whispers, shared glances, and the steady, rhythmic sound of breathing in the dark. It was a world where the harsh reality of Blackwood prison didn't exist, replaced instead by the profound connection between two souls who had found their missing pieces in the middle of a nightmare. But that world shattered on a humid Tuesday afternoon, not with a whisper, but with the roar of 1,000 voices screaming at once. A riot had broken out in the West Wing, a spontaneous explosion of long-simmering rage and desperation. The sound of it traveled through the prison like a tidal wave, a cacophony of metal striking metal, and the primal shouts of men who had nothing left to lose. The alarms began to blare, a high-pitched, rhythmic shriek that felt like it was drilling into Alex's skull, vibrating through the very marrow of his bones. Inside their cell, the atmosphere shifted instantly from quiet contemplation to electric, heart-stopping terror. The heavy steel door was thrown open by a guard who looked more frightened than the inmates, shouting orders that were immediately drowned out by the chaos in the corridor. Gabe was on his feet in a heartbeat. His massive frame seemed to expand, filling the small space and positioning himself as an unbreakable shield between Alex and the doorway. The air in the hall was already thick with the scent of smoke and the acrid tang of pepper spray, making Alex's eyes sting and his throat tighten. "Alex, listen to me." Gabe's voice was like a steadying hand in the middle of a hurricane. It was deep, calm, and filled with an authority that demanded focus. He turned and grabbed Alex's shoulders, his fingers digging into the fabric of the orange jumpsuit just enough to anchor him. "You stay low. You stay in that corner, behind the bunk. Do not move. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, you stay hidden until the guard have full control. Do you understand me?" Alex could only nod, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps that felt like they were tearing at his lungs. He wanted to reach out, to wrap his arms around Gabe's waist and never let go, to disappear into the safety of his presence. He felt so small in the face of the growing madness outside their door, a leaf caught in a gale. "I'm not leaving you, Gabe," Alex whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. Gabe looked at him then, and for a fleeting second, the stoic mask of the silent protector slipped. His steel blue eyes burned with a fierce, desperate love, a raw emotion so powerful it felt like a physical heat. "You're getting out of here, Alex," Gabe said, his voice dropping to a low, sacred vow. "You have a life waiting for you beyond these walls. You have music and books and a family that needs you. Don't you dare let this place take that away from you. My job is to make sure you walk through those gates." Before Alex could reply, the situation turned into pure, unadulterated chaos. A group of inmates surged past the door, and the guards arrived in full tactical gear, a wall of black shields and batons. The transition was brutal and fast. In the confusion and the blinding glare of the corridor lights, Alex was grabbed by two officers and pulled toward the secure evacuation zone. He struggled, his hand reaching out toward the cell, his voice screaming Gabe's name into the void. He saw Gabe standing his ground, a pillar of strength amidst the swirling smoke and violence, his eyes never leaving Alex's face until the heavy steel doors of the block finally slammed shut, severing the connection and plunging Alex into a world of cold, clinical silence. The weeks that followed were a blur of isolation. Alex was moved to a high-security infirmary wing for his own protection, away from the influence of the riot's aftermath. Every day was a battle against the suffocating emptiness in his chest. Without Gabe, the prison didn't just feel like a cage, it felt like a tomb. He missed the sound of Gabe's breathing in the dark, the way the metal bunk shifted under his weight, and the quiet intensity of a gaze that made him feel like he was the only person in the world who mattered. He realized, then, that freedom wasn't just about being outside the walls. It was about being with the person who made the world feel right. He spent his hours staring at the small, barred window, watching the clouds move across a sliver of sky. He thought about the rain in the yard, the way Gabe had caught him, and the way his hand had felt against his cheek. He realized that Gabe hadn't just saved him from a fall. He had saved him from disappearing into his own despair. Then came the day he had dreamed of and dreaded all at once. His release date. Walking through the final, heavy gate of Blackwood was a surreal experience. The air outside was sweet and fresh, smelling of cut grass and the distant scent of the pine forest. The sun was so bright it made his eyes water, and the horizon felt terrifyingly infinite. But as Alex stood on the sidewalk with his small bag of belongings, he didn't feel like a free man. He felt hollow, like a ghost haunting the edges of his own life. He looked back at the gray stone fortress and realized with a crushing certainty that he had left the best part of himself behind. Months passed in a haze of reintegration. Alex returned to his hometown, working 2 jobs to help his family and spending his nights practicing the piano until his fingers ached. He was physically free, but his mind was always back in cell 402. He wrote letters every single week, pouring his soul onto the paper. He told Gabe about the way the leaves change color in the fall, the sound of the wind through the trees, and how every song he played was secretly for him. He told him that he was waiting, that he would always be waiting, because no one else could ever fill the space Gabe had carved out in his heart. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime of silence, the news arrived. Gabe had been moved to a medium security facility in a neighboring state, and his disciplinary record from the riot had been cleared after testimony proved he had acted only to protect others. Most importantly, he was finally allowed visitors. The day of the visit, Alex's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He drove for 6 hours, the landscape blurred by his own anticipation. He sat in the waiting room of the new prison, a place of bright lights and hushed conversations, feeling like his heart was trying to beat its way out of his ribs. When his name was called, he followed the guard through a series of buzzing doors until he reached the visiting room. It was a long hall divided by thick plexiglass and metal counters. And there, at the very end, sat Gabe. He looked different. He was thinner, his face more angular, and there were new lines of weariness around his eyes. But the moment he looked up and saw Alex, his entire face transformed. That steel blue gaze, once so hard and guarded, softened into something so warm and profound that Alex felt like he was finally, truly breathing for the first time in months. They sat across from each other, separated by the glass. For a long time, there were no words. They just looked at each other, letting the reality of the moment sink in, the sheer miracle of seeing each other again. Alex reached out, placing his hand against the cold, clear surface of the plexiglass. His fingers were thin and pale, the hands of a musician who had found his muse again. Slowly, Gabe did the same. He moved his massive hand, the skin rough and scarred, and placed it directly over Alex's on the other side of the glass. Their palms lined up perfectly, separated by only an inch of plastic, but the connection was more powerful than anything Alex had ever felt. It was a bridge built across a canyon of stone and wire. It wasn't about the physical touch anymore. It was about the soul. It was the absolute, unwavering certainty that they were bound together by something the law couldn't touch and walls couldn't break. "I waited for you," Alex whispered into the intercom, his eyes glistening with tears that were no longer about sadness, but about relief. Gabe's voice came through the speaker, that deep, resonant baritone that still made Alex's heart skip a beat. It was a sound that felt like home. "I never doubted you would, Alex. Every day I spent in that cell, I just closed my eyes and imagined you out here, living the life you deserve. That was enough for me." "It's not enough for me," Alex said, leaning closer to the glass. "I'm going to be here every week. And when you walk out of those gates, I'll be the one waiting on the other side. We have a whole life to catch up on, Gabe." Gabe smiled then, a rare, beautiful expression that lit up his entire face. "Then I guess I better start counting the days." In that moment, The prison disappeared. The guards, the lights, the bars, they all faded into the background. There was only the two of them, held together by a love that had been forged in the fire of the most difficult place on earth. The road home had been long and filled with shadows, but they had finally reached the end of the dark. They had found a freedom that didn't depend on where they were, but on whom they belonged to. The story of Alex and Gabe is a testament to the fact that the human heart can find beauty in the most desolate places. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't surviving the storm, but being brave enough to love someone in the middle of it. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. If you found yourself rooting for Alex and Gabe, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story of love and transformation. Now, I want to hear from you. This story explores a very specific kind of bond. In a world that often values physical strength and toughness above everything else, do you think Alex's vulnerability was a weakness, or was it actually the secret weapon that allowed Gabe to find his own humanity again? Who do you think was truly saved in this story? Was it the boy who needed a protector, or the man who needed a reason to care? Write your thoughts in the comments below. I can't wait to read your perspectives. Until next time, remember that no matter how high the walls are, the heart always finds a way to climb over them. Keep looking for the light.